So 3.8, solving decimal equations. We've solved equations, like I said, equations with decimals now. So that means there's going to be decimals in there. Well, we've worked on adding decimals. We've worked on subtracting decimals. We've worked on dividing decimals. And we've worked on multiplying decimals. So now we're going to use it in equations. So remember, takes you back. Use the inverse is a word we used. But what's that also mean?
Wait, inverse.
Inverse is the same as opposite.
I knew it. Can we do opposite instead?
Inverse is the math word. Opposite is the more practical word. So I write them both there. Use the inverse operation to get the variable alone on one side of the equation. Another little hint, remembrance for you, there will be a couple of questions about rectangles in their area. The area of a rectangle is its length times its width, or some say base times height. Okay, so length times width, base times height, that gets you your area.
Length times or what? Base times. Didn't we already do this?
We did, but now we're going to do it with decimals.
Oh, that concerns me.
Okay.
That concerns me.
All right, so we have some steps to follow here. Step one is rewrite the problem. Well, on our notes, we're not going to rewrite it because I gave you room to work. But since you can't write in the book, you've got to rewrite the problem. So step one, this is like the first step right here, is rewriting that, getting that down on your paper. G minus 3.1 equals 4.5. That's step one. Step two is perform the inverse, and inverse we said is opposite. Operation to get the variable all by itself. So our goal is to get G all by itself here. So what's happening to G? It's G.
It's getting subtracted.
It's getting subtracted. So what's the opposite or the inverse?
G plus 3.1.
Yeah, we're going to add 3.1 here. So add 3.1. And we do that on both sides.
Oh.
Don't forget that piece. So the first row you're going to write is the problem. The second row that you're going to write is what you're adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. If you go down 3.1, then you go back up 3.1, you're back to where you started, so where these cancel.
Yep.
You have G all by itself now. And 4.5 plus 3.1. When we add decimals, we line up the decimals.
7.5.
And we add. So 5 plus 1 is 6. 4 plus 3 is 7. So we have G equals 7.6. So this would be the third thing you'd write there, and that's your answer. Some of you like to rewrite your answer off to the side. That's fine. If you want to just circle your answer where you're at, that's fine as well.
Can you use the calculator?
Next one. What does it mean when a number is right next to a letter? What operation is that?
Multiplication.
It's multiplication. So what's the opposite or the inverse of multiplication? Division. So we're going to divide.
3K equals 3,000.
Divide by 3. Divide by 3. The 3's cancel.
Wait, oh my.
K equals, and you're going to do 8.1 divided by 3. So 8.1 divided by 3. What do I do with my decimal when I'm dividing?
Drop it.
You don't drop it. You put it straight up. So does 3 fit into 8?
Yes. 2 times.
2 times. Subtract 2, bring down the 1. Does 3 fit into 21?
7 times.
7 times.
Huh?
And we're left with 0, so we have
2
K
plus-
equals 2.7. So we're doing inverse operations.
I like this thing.
I apologize, the next one is at the very bottom of your paper and there's not a whole lot of room to work there. So if you can squeeze it in, great. Otherwise, just go to the side and move it up there.
Yeah,
So,
division.
when you have a fraction, this is something you'll hear me say often coming up. A fraction is the same as a division problem. So m, and then you got that fraction line 5, that would be m divided by 5. So what's the opposite of division? Multiplication. So times 5 times 5. These cancel. So m equals, and how do we multiply with fractions again?
What?
When we multiply with fractions, or with decimals, sorry.
You just go across.
How do we multiply with decimals?
Put the
Oh,
decimal down.
you.
Don't worry about this.
We don't worry about the decimal, and at the end we count how many decimal places we had and put it back in.
Yes.
So in this case, don't worry about the decimal. So 5 times 5 is
25.
25. 5 times 1 is
5.
plus 2,
7.
7.
7.5.
And we have one decimal place. So we're going to have one decimal place here. So m equals 7.5. So adding and subtracting line up the decimals. Multiplying, don't line up the decimals. Just count them at the end.
Why is there always...
So here is the last two story problems of this section here. The area of the floor in Jonah's bedroom is 28 square meters. If the length is 3.5, what's the width of the bedroom? What was the formula again for area of a rectangle?
Length is fine. Width.
So area equals length times width. So from this, do we know what the area is?
Yes.
What's the area?
28.
So 28 equals, do we know the length?
Yeah.
No, we don't.
3.5. We do, because it's right here. The length is 3.5. We don't know the width, though. So 3.5 times W. So what am I going to undo? I have to undo what operation? I have to undo multiplication.
Division.
So I have to do division. So divide by 3.5. Divide by 3.5. So we now have 28 divided by 3.5. What do we do when there's a decimal on the outside of the division? We move it. We hop it over 1, which means I'm going to take this decimal here and hop it over 1. What do I do when I have a blank space?
Zero.
Add a 0. So my decimal's right here now. I'll get rid of this extra. So 35 into 280. What do you think, Grady?
8.
8 times? So did you do that one on the calculator?
Yeah.
Did it work? Okay. So Grady says on the calculator 8 times 35 is 280. So there you go, you get 0. So the width is 8. Okay? And if you want to be very proper, you would say it's 8 meters. I probably won't mark you off if you don't write meters, but it is nice to do that.
Do you have to do like W equals 8 meters?
Yes.
You could, yeah, either way. If you wrote 8 meters on the blank for the answer, or if you wrote W equals 8, or if you wrote 8 on the blank, that's okay. As long as you're showing this work that's on there, it becomes much easier for me to check. So Jonah's now going to put carpet in his bedroom. So same bedroom. Okay, so we have, how many square meters are in the bedroom?
28.
28. And 1 square meter costs $22.50. So what's the total cost going to be? What kind of problem do we need to do? We need to do some multiplication. So we're going to take our 28, which is our total area, our total square meters, times our 22.5, our cost for 1. So 22.5 times 28. Notice how I lined up the right side of both number. I didn't worry about where the decimals were. Eight times 5?
40.
40. 8 times 2
16.
plus 4,
Ooh, 20.
20. 8 times 2, 16 plus 2,
18.
18.
Upside.
And then you put 1 0 down there because you're in the second level. So the first level, no zeros. Second level, 1 0. 2 times 5,
10.
10. 2 times 2
4.
plus 1,
5.
2 times 2,
4.
add all those up.
6,300.
$6,300.
It's too much.
Whoa.
That's real.
Is that right?
No.
I don't think so.
What did we forget?
That's really expensive.
What did we forget? We forgot our decimal. How many decimals are in this number here? 1. How many decimals are in this one?
1. Nothing.
None. So how many total decimals is my answer?
1.
So if I were you, I would put a decimal right here and erase that comma that I put in there.
Divided by
640.
So, does that sound more reasonable? $630? Sounds more reasonable, right? Because we forgot that decimal, right, Happy?